Welcome to 5-Minute Lessons for Nonprofits. I'm Ben Takis, and today we're going to talk about the public support test under Section 509A2 of the Internal Revenue Code. In a prior 5-minute lesson, we talked about a different public support test, the one under Section 170B1A6, and I found that there's a lot of confusion about how different the 509A2 test is and when that is the appropriate test to use. So I'm hoping with this quick lesson that you'll get a better understanding of how the 509A2 test works. This is just going to be a very simple, basic overview. We only have time to cover a few things. More importantly, what are we not going to cover? We're not going to go through the significance of the public support test and what it means. We did cover a good amount of that in the video on the other public support test. We're not going to talk about what happens if an organization fails the test. And we're not going to go through all the specific nuances of the calculations. So getting started, what kind of organizations tend to use the 509A2 test? It tends to be 501c3 organizations whose revenue comes mainly from membership fees and the sale of goods and services that are related to the organization's mission and 501c3 exempt purpose. This kind of revenue is often referred to as fee-for-service or exempt function revenue. The tricky thing about the 509A2 test is that it actually has two parts. There's a positive requirement and a negative requirement, and you'll see what I mean by that. So the first part is called the 1/3 public support test, and in this you need to show that at least 1/3 of the organization's total support comes from grants, contributions, membership fees, and revenue from related business activities, that fee-for-service exempt function revenue that we talked about. The other side, the negative requirement, is that you have to show that not more than 1/3 of the organization's total support comes from certain types of revenue, namely investment income and unrelated business activities. Focusing first on the 1/3 public support test, there are a few different types of revenue that are going to count towards public support. The first is pretty standard for most types of nonprofit organizations. We're talking about gifts, grants, contributions, and membership fees. And the next two items are more in line with that exempt function revenue, the business revenue that I mentioned before. Now, those two gross receipts items are subject to an important limitation. Amounts from each payer count towards each year's public support only up to a limit of 1% of total support for the year, or $5,000, whichever is greater. There's also a very important exclusion in the 509A2 test, in that amounts received from disqualified persons are not counted towards public support at all. So this includes your board member contributions, donations from officers, as well as certain major donors, which are referred to as substantial contributors, which can be a bit complicated, but just be aware that this is a major downside of the 509A2 test. Turning now to the not more than 1/3 test, this says that no more than 1/3 of an organization's total support can come from investment income or unrelated business revenue. Okay, let's walk through an example and see how all these rules look in practice. So with this organization that we're looking at, let's assume that they have $100,000 in the year from event revenue. This organization also has revenue from consulting that it does, and this one client has paid $50,000 over the course of a year. They also have $45,000 in donations from board members and $15,000 from other donors, and we'll say that none of them are disqualified persons. And lastly, they have $30,000 in investment income. So with these numbers, total support over the 1-year period is $240,000. And the per year limit, 1% would equal $2,400. So we're going to use the $5,000 limit instead because that's greater. Now, as we go through each of these sources of revenue, we'll see that the event revenue is going to count in full, all $100,000 of that. But the consulting income, applying the limit, we're only going to get to count $5,000 towards public support. The board member donations are not going to count at all because of the exclusion for disqualified persons, but the donations from other non-disqualified persons will count in full, and the investment income is not going to count. So adding all that up, we have total public support over the 1 year period of $120,000. Now let's see how that looks when we take a 5 year period. And to keep things simple here, we're going to just assume that all of those 1 year numbers look exactly the same every year over a 5 year period. In real life, this probably wouldn't happen, but just to keep it simple as an example. So all of these numbers have just been multiplied by 5. So looking at the 5 year period as a whole, we have total support of $1.2 million. And if we go through each revenue source, we see that $500,000 in event revenue counts in full. Only $25,000 from the consulting client counts because of the $5,000 per year limit. None of the board donations count, but the full $75,000 from other donors is going to count, and none of the investment income is going to count. So total public support over this 5 year period equals $600,000. And then for the not more than 1/3 test, all of that investment income is going to count towards that, and we don't have any other sources in this example. So this organization, they have passed the 1/3 public support test with a total percentage of 50%, and they are also good under the not more than 1/3 test because their investment income only makes up 12.5% of their total support. That should do it for today. Thanks for watching. For more information, visit the website at SE4nonprofits.com. See you next time.